And here we are in Proverbs, which is the wisdom book personified, because in it has Lady Wisdom personified. And in Hebrew, she is Chochmah, which is Sophia in Greek. And she's often known as Lady Wisdom because, as I said, you'll find in Proverbs, if you've looked at it at all with the information John sent out, admittedly it wasn't till yesterday late, you will find that she is a figure that has her own kind of entity and in her own right.
So we're going to think a little bit about the book of Proverbs before we move into Lady Wisdom. The purpose of the book as a whole is to make suggestions and give guidance as to how people might live life and cope with life. It emphasises teachings gathered from the tradition of the elders and from experience. And I've noted before, in terms of wisdom literature, it does not rely simply on revelatory understanding, but on experiential and observational understandings. So it doesn't have, like many other books of the Hebrew Bible do have, Proverbs doesn't have the themes of covenant, either the Mosaic covenant, the 10 Commandments, or the Davidic covenant with the house of David. It doesn't refer to worship in the temple. It rarely refers to sacrifices. Its focus is on moral ideas, inculcating the moral life. And the guiding principle in all of this is this saying, which appears in chapter 9, it's there in chapter 1, it's in chapter 15. The concept appears a number of times. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And we've talked about fear in an earlier session, whether it was morning or evening, I can't remember, but fear in the sense of adoration and awe and immense respect for the Lord God. So there are a whole lot of values that are emphasized throughout the sayings in Proverbs, values like honesty, diligence, being trustworthy, self-restraint, and having appropriate attitudes towards wealth and poverty. So the books are meant to inspire moral ideals. Sorry, that slide went. Who wrote the book? Well, like many of the books in the Old Testament, we don't know. And like many of the books in the Old Testament, there are relatively few direct clues about this. The best response is probably there were multiple authors, there were anonymous authors, they were spread out over time. It was probably, like much of Hebrew scripture, was completed in the form that we know it after the exile, when the priests were rebuilding the society in Jerusalem, reactivating the temple, providing guidance for life after exile. So from 520 before the time of Jesus through over the next few centuries. It may well have contained a material that is pre-exilic, and because much of the material is these short, pithy proverbs, these short, pithy sayings, then they readily get handed down by word of mouth. We've got lots of proverbs that we just pass on from one generation to another that's been going on for millennia, really. There are 3 verses that indicate this is Solomon's work, the very first verse, and then in chapter 10 and chapter 25. And that probably comes from the accounts of the wisdom of Solomon, 1 Kings 4. And certainly attributing these sayings to Solomon lends authority and sort of gravitas to what is in the book. Who is it written for? There are clues throughout, like the verse that's there on the right-hand side, my son, fear your father's instruction. There are clues that make it obvious that primarily it's aimed at young men preparing for adult responsibilities. So there's a strongly male-centered perspective that is dominant throughout the book.
It is true also to say, and unusually true, that twice Proverbs also directs the young man to pay attention to the wisdom of his mother. And of course, we have two figures of women in Proverbs that are important. We've got the woman in Proverbs 31, the woman of valor, and then we have, of course, Lady Wisdom in who we are going to look at today. So while it's very male-centered, there's also this strong, quite unusual feminine perspective in it.
So Proverbs invites the reader to intellectual discipline, to pay attention to these sayings, these teachings, to learn from wisdom. And this intellectual discipline is seen as a life-giving pathway for how to live life, to have ethical concern for other people, to live with a life of righteousness and piety. That's the challenge and the invitation of Proverbs. How do you think this fits into your understanding of faith? What role does intellectual searching, intellectual curiosity, intellectual discipline have in your life of faith? How does that fit into your understanding of faith? We thought we'd just reflect on that for a minute. Any thoughts?
Well, you're all here.
Yeah, I was going to say that we're all here. Yes,
That's right.
Yes.
That's a start.
And I think it's a sort of a discipline or of our domination. And
I just start off by observing that the very fact that we're gathered here today doing what we're doing means that we are seeking knowledge, seeking further understanding, perhaps seeking wisdom for ourselves as an active part of our faith.
Yeah, I think that's what I was suggesting, Ian. How much as Christians, do we routinely, consciously set these kind of goals for ourselves of reading more scripture, of learning about it, of actually pursuing ways that we can be better disciples? How good are we at that in our Christian tradition?
Probably not good enough.
In intention, not necessarily in practice.
Yeah.
I think too that for many people it's still regarded as something that, you know, maybe only the intellectuals do. But I think that the more understanding we have of Scripture, the more alive it becomes. I mean, that's been the joy of my faith journey. So I don't know if it's true of everyone, but it has been very true for me, because I reckon intellect is a gift from God, and if you've got some of it, we should be exercising it and using it for our own benefit and for the wider understanding of the faith.
Yep, well said, Margaret.
I think it's a pattern of church life, isn't it? We've always encouraged, you don't always get the 100% take up, but we've always encouraged people to inquire and to study and be part of groups that have got an inquiring mind.
Yes.
I think it's something that we've built into the training of our ministers, that they're educated and have knowledge and hopefully wisdom.
Overflowing with it.
I think it's, yeah, I think it's really important that we can not simply learn the scriptures, but that we can stand up and be able to say, this is something, this is how I see this is how it sits with my common sense and my understanding of human relations. So to me, it's also that we need to apply our life experience to how we read the scripture.
Because if it doesn't fit within your experience and you can't make sense of it within your experience, then it's not a lot of use to you, really.
No.
Yeah, so that's a good observation, I think.
Yeah, this is where I think it was Wesley, wasn't it, used to want to bring in, you know, scripture and experience have to go together, as well as understanding, like through intellect and all the rest. We bring all of that to the scriptures. Mm,
Well, it's like the title of Gordon Digger's book, Faith Seeking Understanding.
yeah.
And one would hope that for people of faith do seek understanding and do seek ways they can articulate it. We might move on now to our next bit. So, John, you want to pop up the slides
Yeah.
again?
So the topic of this whole series is where shall wisdom be found? And in the book of Proverbs, there's a very simple answer. There's a more complex answer, but the simple answer is wisdom is found at the town gate, because that's what it says. Now, we need to think a little bit about the town gate. What was the town gate? That was the place where business was conducted and judgment was made on matters of law. And the people that did that were the men who were the elders of the town or the city. So the town gate is for business and legal matters to be determined. Monetary transactions as well as legal transactions taking place here. This is where the elders, the men of the town, are to be found day after day. And this is where the power plays take place in the male-dominated society. Meantime, the domain for women, over which they had full control, but it was a very different domain, was the privacy of their home and their family. So if a woman was to enter into the public arena, like the town gate, she would need to do so with a chaperone, a male member of her family or much older woman. So it was very clear demarcation, both physically and the gender demarcation was quite obvious.
We'll explore this more in the Book of Ruth, where we find Ruth operating primarily in the private domain of women, and of course Boaz is operating in the public domain of men at the town gate in the last chapter. So we'll explore these cultural things more in when we get to Ruth. Now, the figure of wisdom has fascinated people, scholars and church people since the inception of the Christian church, pretty much. Well, she's fascinated them before then because she's a Jewish figure. And she's been described in many, many ways. She's an aspect of God. She's a divine entity existing in her own right, even something approaching a feminine deity, depending on who you are reading. Proverbs states that wisdom was present at the beginning of creation and was a co-creator with God who delighted in her presence. So she appears to be a mystical feminine aspect of God. She's cherished as a true gift from God, and wisdom is considered to be the mark of a righteous person. And so we're going to look at her in her context, and we're also going to look at her as a role model for the church, what she's saying and what she is doing. Now, in Hebrew, she is Chokhmah, and that's what it looks like in Hebrew. Sometimes it's spelled H-O-C-H-M-A, sometimes it's C-H-O-C-H-M-A. The difference with the C at the front is simply how you transliterate that first Hebrew letter. There's two H's in Hebrew. There's the one and there's a soft one like a ha. So occasionally when people put a C on for to indicate it's the hard form of H. So that's wisdom, and it occurs many, many. Wise and wisdom occur hundreds of times in the Hebrew Bible, but it is here in Proverbs that we find wisdom personified. And she's presented here as a cosmic figure who delights in the dance of creation. She's a master craftswoman. She's a teacher of justice. She stands at the head of people. She's a leader to them. She accompanies them on their way through history. And like many things in our Bible, the word wisdom, of course, has a double meaning. It can refer to the characteristic of life, where we talk about being wise or we're seeking wisdom, or it can refer to this personified figure that is linked with the divine. Lady Wisdom in Proverbs 1, 8 and 9 is an extraordinary portrayal in many ways. Firstly, she's an eternal gift from God. She's a creation that is a gift to humanity. Wisdom is God's first creation in the book of Proverbs. She was beside him like a master work of the earth's establishment, and it talks about her carving out the boundaries around the sea and the land. She's not a goddess, but she's a conceptual entity in the feminine gender. That is not accidental. All the characteristics of God in the Hebrew Bible are feminine. The Ruach, the spirit, breath, wind of God, is feminine. The Shekhinah is the glory of God, or the pillar of fire that went before the people in the Exodus story. She is feminine. And the voice of God is the Bat Kol, which literally means daughter of the voice, which is feminine. So wisdom is also presented as speaking for the Lord in monotheistic Judaism. She is the voice of the Lord. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. So this very positive image of femaleness as a source of truth, peace, and the Lord's favor is pretty breathtaking when you look at the counterpoint to the negative depiction of women generally as metaphors we find in the Old Testament. For example, in Isaiah, Israel is referred to as a whore with many lovers. That's Jeremiah, sorry. Her daughters are called filthy in Isaiah. We find in Proverbs itself, there is a counterpoint to wisdom, the adulterous woman. We find in things like Ezekiel, and also Hosea, where Hosea marries a faithless woman, Gomer. We find these really negative images depicted. So to have this semi kind of divine entity here, feminine, is quite extraordinary. And it does raise some questions about why the writers of Proverbs presented wisdom as a female. So we've got another question for you to think about here. Why do you think wisdom is presented as a woman? And can you think of any female traditions from the time of the Hebrew Bible that the writers of Proverbs might be drawing on? So why do you think they've made her a woman? And what traditions might they be drawing on that you can think of? Any ideas?
Are you putting people into groups or?
Welcome back. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share from their group? Some wisdom, perhaps. Why is Lady Wisdom a woman?
Well, we had one member who didn't ask why, except to say that, well, it's arbitrary as to whether it's anything is assigned male or female gender. But the interesting question was, Ian, you can ask it, the last one that you asked, just as we were going out of our rooms, about why was the Latin word to translate wisdom translated to a male gender rather than female?
Just because the word in Latin is gendered male. Some languages use gender just as a construct, and so you can find neuter tables and neuter young women and feminine windows, and because it's a construct. The question is whether it's a construct in Hebrew, and I would say no, it's not. It's quite deliberate that wisdom is a female. In the same way, it's deliberate God is a male.
Right. In English, spirit is not gendered. It's neuter, isn't it? We don't talk about the Holy Spirit as he or she. It's just the Holy Spirit. It has no gender.
That's because in English, we only assign gender to sentient things that are male and female, and everything else is neuter. That's the way English is constructed. It's not like German that assigns a gender to everything.
Or French.
Male or female, you're neuter.
Yep, French as well. Morning, Enid.
Morning, Patricia.
Yeah. So, yeah. Apart from grammatical concerns, does anyone else have anything they wish to offer?
I wondered whether the goddess Azara has something to do with this. She was obviously female. She has been described as the wife of God and was worshipped in the Jewish society at least by women up until the exile.
Yes, you are correct, Piers, I think. I think that this portrait of wisdom is a hangover from the times where there were female goddesses. And we know in the time of writing of the Bible, especially in the Northern Kingdom, that Asherah was worshipped up there and had a place in the temple up there, or what they called a temple up there. So I think that historically you are probably correct, that these things like the Shekhinah and are manifestations of a former time when there was goddess worship. We also know archaeologically that thousands of normal Israelite houses have been excavated, and all of them have had these little female goddess figures found in the homes, in the excavation. So whatever the prophets and priests were saying in the Bible, the common people were doing something quite different. And obviously there was this sense that there were female goddesses, that they had little household goddesses that these Israelite places clearly had. These common Israelite homes had them. So wisdom is probably connected with that as well, whatever that was. Did anyone think of any traditions that the Bible has about women? We just might go back just a second, John. What are the female traditions we've got that it might draw on in the Bible?
Well, homemaking was one of them.
It was.
And raising the children.
I don't think wisdom's homemaking or raising children, though.
No, but that was one of the traditions.
It was a tradition, but I don't think this is the tradition that's being drawn on. Certainly Proverbs 31, a good wife who can find, she's drawing on those traditions.
Yes.
Where's wisdom drawing from? Come on, think. Women in the Bible.
Well, the only person who was mentioned in our little group was Deborah.
Yes, Deborah is a really good example of where this might come from. Any others? What about Miriam, the sister of Moses?
Oh, yes.
It's her prophetic song. So you have Miriam that this could be drawing on. Okay, well, better move on to the next session. But it is an unusual thing what's happening here.
Where do Ruth and Naomi fit into that? Is that in the category of wisdom? Ruth's words to Naomi, entreat me not to leave thee. It's women sticking together, one generation looking after another.
I think that Ruth is certainly, Ruth is part of the wisdom literature and has many of the characteristics of the wisdom literature. And I think Ruth in particular demonstrates a wisdom in that book. So it's possible that it's also drawing on women like Ruth as well. Esther, possibly. We're going to be looking at Esther. So there are women who are seen as having a role in Judaism that is significant, that this could be drawing on as role models. Yep. Okay, so the first passage we're looking at in Proverbs is from chapter 1. I have not put the whole thing up that we're looking at, but we're looking at this particularly, these verses. Wisdom cries out in the street, in the square, she raises her voice. So she is in the public domain. She's at the busiest part of the public domain. She's at the entrance to the city gates. And she's crying out there. She's very unladylike. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing? And fools hate knowledge. Give heed to my reproof. I will pour out my thoughts to you. I will make my words known to you. So wisdom in this chapter, because it goes on, as I said, I don't have the whole thing up. It goes to 33. She's speaking very much like a prophet in this chapter, though she's using typical words of a teacher. You'll find that there's various words she shares with the book of Ecclesiastes, for instance, when she talks about her wisdom and talks about getting wisdom and instructing people and teaching people. She is standing where the prophets and teachers would have stood, at the busiest place where all this business was being transacted, both of a commercial nature and also a religious nature in terms of looking at judgment on how people were having disputes and how the law might apply, etc. The other notable thing to note about this is that she appears to be toting a God of all peoples. And again, this is unusual in the Old Testament because normally it speaks to Jewish peoples, but she's standing at a crossroads where you might expect there's a whole lot of people in the public domain. She's not in the temple. She's not in a synagogue. She's out in the public crossroads and she's outside the town gate there. And this is where nations trading with Israel would have passed through, or it would be the place where you might see people from other nations passing past your nation or your city on their business somewhere else. So she's in a place where it's not just Jewish people that are going to hear her. She's in a place where there is all manner of people who might hear her. She's also prophetic in the sense that she says those who ignore the invitation will be punished, much as the prophets decreed that ignoring commands they carried from God would be punished.
Right.
But the main difference is she's speaking in her own voice. She doesn't say, "Thus says the Lord," as you'd find in Isaiah or Ezekiel or one of the other prophets. She does mention the fear of the Lord, and she says, if you do this, you'll get good things, and if you don't do this, you'll be punished. I don't know the punishment is very terrible, other than you've got to live with your own foolishness, and she won't be there at the end if you want her back at but it is a very prophetic way of going about things. So if you desire her, good things will come, and if you don't, you'll probably invite calamity into your life. So in our large group, I'm going to ask you to think about this question. What are the things that strike you about this passage and its portrayal of wisdom? And what connections can you see yourselves between the prophets and the portrayal of wisdom? I mean, maybe nothing strikes you as curious about it, but I thought we'd just have a quick think about this particular question. So does anything stand out in this passage for people?
Well, she's at the town gates and not in a building.
She is. She's not in her household weaving and sewing like the woman in 31. She's doing quite the opposite.
Mm.
I feel like she needs to hit social media and talk to some of these people who don't like being vaccinated. That's what I feel like.
Yes, wisdom would be
We
probably good
need,
in that
she's
role.
badly needed at the moment.
What can I ask? Why in verse 22 does she talk to the people she's talking to? She calls them the simple ones. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? If she's talking to us, is she putting us down, calling us simple?
Yep.
Well, she is in a way, I think.
Oh, she is.
This is an old text, remember, Ian? And how did the prophets talk to people? Did they say, let's have a nice pastoral conversation? Or did they say, you idiots, you're
Faithless.
doing the wrong thing, do it, change it immediately, or God will smite you?
Yeah, that's right. No holes barred. You're
No
silly.
holds barred.
If you're not listening, you're silly.
Pretty much. So it's not so much, it is a bit of a put down, but it's just saying, why do you want to remain ignorant? Why would you want to remain ignorant when you can grasp hold of me and gain wisdom?
Yes, it gives them an opportunity, doesn't it? Do they want to take it? Do they want to take the opportunity, or do they just want to continue on their little way?
Yeah.
Are they comfortable?
Yes. Sorry, I cut someone off there. Who was it?
It was me, and I just said, are they comfortable where they are and don't want to move?
Well, they might be comfortable where they are and don't want to move. And Ian's question begs a question from me. Would you ask that question, Ian, if we were looking at a prophet?
I was just going to go with that one.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Your question was, is she making fun of us by calling us simple? Is she putting us down? And I said, would you ask that question if you read the same verse in Isaiah?
Well, I answer this as a former teacher. I had 21 years as a classroom teacher, and I just know from that you don't ever put your students down. You build up. You take what they know and you build on that. You don't ever demean them or diminish them or put them down. You're an encourager. Jesus was the great teacher. He was an encourager, except when he was putting down the Pharisees.
Well, he wasn't very pastoral then. And his disciples.
So he also he also put the disciples down too.
Yeah, you foolish ones, you of little faith, you of no faith. Do you still don't get it? I'm not sure that I'm going to enter Jesus into winning those pastoral stakes. I don't think wisdom is a teacher like a classroom teacher, Ian, but my question still stands. Have you ever read the prophets and thought the same thing? Do you think the prophets should be more pastoral? Do you think they're doing the wrong thing when they call out Israel?
Well, I guess the answer to that is that prophets appear in times of trouble, when situations are dire, they're about to be sent off to Babylon, or they're in Babylon weeping for Zion. So prophets generally come with apocalyptic messages. They're not there to comfort, they're there to stir people up.
Wisdom isn't there to comfort either. She's there to warn them before they get to that point where they need a prophet to bail them out.
That's right. I'm calling male favoritism here, Ian.
That's right.
I'm saying that wisdom's getting picked on because she's a woman. You can think.
I think it's.
Shall we take a vote on it? I think it'd be a close vote.
I think it would be.
I don't think so.
Part of the issue is the language, the way language functions in ancient Jewish texts, because hyperbole and exaggeration and polemic are littered throughout the Bible, and we've kind of smoothed it and we've become used to it. But this is the Jewish way, the ancient Israelite way of doing things was very argumentative compared to our culture. I think that's part of the issue.
Yes.
It's a very the reproof is pretty generous, because then she says, I've poured out my thoughts I'll pour out my thoughts, I'll call you, I'll stretch out my hand. So it's there's a kind of generosity in the way she's calling people to account, I think.
Yes, there is. And we'll find that generosity is going to extend to an abundant hospitality as we move through Proverbs. That will happen. But I think that's right. I think the main take out of this is wisdom is utterly subversive. She's a female. She's in public on her own. She is speaking like a male prophet or teacher. She's speaking with authority in the place where judgments about the law are made. She's speaking with the authority of God behind her in a way that women do not usually do in this Bible. She has turned things completely upside down. Everything she's doing is very counterculture. So it's important to note that. We're going to look at Proverbs 3 now.
Just as a counterpoint, the last two verses in that passage we were just talking about from Proverbs 1 she says, the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. And so that picks up something of the apocalyptic tone, I think, Ian.
And I was just looking up a Hebrew Bible, and it says thoughtless.
It says,
how long you thoughtless will you love thoughtlessness?
Thoughtless, okay, right.
And how long will your scorners delight them in scorning?
We better do a bit of thinking about simple then, yeah. So as a contrast, we'll look at this section from Proverbs 3. We'll look at this section from Proverbs 3, which is more like a hymn. So in chapter 1, Proverbs has been provoking people at the city gate to listen to her. In chapter 3, this is a hymn, a poem that says what the benefits are, what the blessings are from those who listen. Happy are those who find wisdom and those who get understanding. Her income is better than silver, her revenue is better than gold, she's more precious than jewels, nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, in her left hand are riches and honour. Her ways are ways of pleasantness and all her paths are peace. It's almost like the poetry It's not quite the love poetry of the Song of Songs, but it's that poetic style of offering the generous offer that comes from those who find wisdom and get understanding. And then this striking image, she is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. Those who hold her fast are called happy. So long life, harmony, peace, self-fulfillment, wealth and honour. And there's kind of a flashback to Genesis here with this phrase, the tree of life, or a tree of life. And there's some consideration about, is this a reference back to the tree of life? Rather, it's seen to be more of like a comparison or a metaphor rather than a direct reference to the Genesis scene. She is like the tree of life, and the tree of life produces fruit in abundance, and you eat that fruit and that enables you, that gives you sustenance for living. So those who hold her fast are called happy, or another way of translating this is blessed. And we know about blessed are those from the sayings of Jesus. So wisdom is really the most precious commodity that we can strive for, because all of these other things come as a result of gaining wisdom. So we thought that a provocative question for you to explore in your groups now is to contrast that, what wisdom is saying, with the context in which we live in the Western world. We have more wealth concentrated in our country and other Western dominated countries than in just about any other time in the history. We've got many things and many privileges, but do we have wisdom? And if we do have wisdom, what does it look like? So we thought we'd invite you to think about this poem of the blessings of wisdom in terms of the context that we all live in. We'll do that in groups, Elizabeth.
Yep, I'm going to open rooms now. Any thoughts you'd like to share with other people from your group discussion?
I just realized, Elizabeth, that I'm wise enough to know that I'm stupid, because so I have wisdom, but still, stupid enough to keep buying things and putting them on and, doing things. So that was a revelation for me.
Yeah. I guess there's an old saying that says the more you know, the less you realise you know. Yes. I don't think I'm saying that quite right, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
I think we've made simple as a pejorative, haven't we? Rather than, like, to be simple really is quite a good thing. It's to be uncomplicated, and whereas, anyway, when we now talk of somebody being simple, it's a bit of a put down.
Yeah, that's right. We think of it as someone who's not all there in inverted commas. But there was a phrase years ago from one of the world poverty programs that was live simply so others may simply live. That picks up that concept you're talking about quite well, I think.
Yeah.
To be simple in that we don't complicate our life with, clutter it up with lots of possessions and lots of things.
So, I'm proudly simple.
Proudly simple, yes.
Well, I don't know. Have a look around his study. A lot of stuff.
There's always an excuse for buying books.
And pieces of art and artworks.
Yes, exactly. John buys books, I buy artworks.
Yeah, you're only saying that because 2 more books just arrived this morning.
We tried to have a rule that if you bought new books, 2 books had to be given away, or it's not working.
I removed 5 books from the bookshelves up the front of the house today, and they're now down. Is this being recorded? I'm sorry.
So I'm going to hold you to it if you say anything.
I took 5 books from the front of the house. They're down the back of the house, so there's room up the front of the house for more books. Anyway.
It doesn't, and we had so many books that 2 of our bookshelves actually collapsed under their weight, so we need to think about that. Anyway, anyone else want to share something about that?
Well, I think COVID has definitely shown up a lot of holes in our system, both nationally and internationally.
Yes, I think you're right, Enid. When we look at, we are a wealthy country, but we don't actually have things in place like people who are casually employed.
Yeah.
that don't have sick leave, people without enough superannuation, people who are in vulnerable employment, to exploitation. You know, there's all sorts of gaps that we've shown up in the way we do things that have made it very difficult for a certain class of worker to actually survive through lockdowns well.
Yes.
And
But also the fact that we've got all the acknowledgement goes to sports stars, film stars and things. Scientists, every time you get a scientist on who has something positive to say, you'll find somebody who gets on and tries to pull them down. So it's science that we should be applauding and holding up as wisdom, and yet it's not being acknowledged.
Yes, listening to scientists has become somewhat unfashionable in recent years with the rise of fake news and conspiracy theories and other things. And that's actually quite a worry that we're not listening to experts in the same way anymore.
No.
Surely wisdom's always rare, and otherwise it wouldn't be so prized. Life so much is, particularly in these times of multimedia, is live very much on the superficial for many people. And if wisdom wasn't so rare, perhaps it wouldn't be so valued.
That's a good point, because it is pointing out that it's highly valuable and it is equated. She is equated with rare things, but she's saying I am attainable. And so on that note, we're going to segue into Proverbs 8, which has our main portrait of wisdom. So we're going to have a look like this. So this is where wisdom is definitely personified, and is personified as a near deity. She's the first creation of God. She is involved in the creation process. Does not wisdom call, and does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way at the crossroads she takes her stand. Beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portal she cries out. To you, O people I call, and my cry is to all, there's that all that live. O simple ones, learn prudence, acquire intelligence, you who lack it. So the other special thing about wisdom, as well as her very subversive nature and stand she is taking, she is presenting a radical democratic concept that anyone, that's all, anyone, whether illiterate or uneducated or educated, whether with or without status, whether poor or wealthy, anyone can acquire wisdom. And that's a radical shift from some things we've seen. And she goes on, I have good advice and sound wisdom. I have insight. I have strength. By me, kings reign. Rulers decree what is just. By me, rulers rule, and nobles all who govern rightly. I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently find me. So this is a wonderful picture of wisdom here. She is available to everyone. Now we're going to watch a video. Oh, we'll just go on, sorry.
Oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
John, I'll finish reading it. And this last part of 8 we're looking at is, the Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts long ago. Ages ago I was set up, before the beginning of the earth, when there were no depths I was brought forth, when there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth, when he had not yet made earth and fields, or the world's first bits of soil. So wisdom is the first creation, and as a master craftswoman, she's going to actually help God. It goes on to create, as I said, the land, and help sculpt out the land and from the sea. So we're going to watch a video now from Bible Project again, and it's on wisdom and Proverbs chapter 8. It is 7 minutes long, but we thought it was worth watching the whole thing.
In the story of the Bible, God creates the world by carving order out of disorder and darkness.
Like an artist, creating a place where life can flourish.
Right. And still today, God's ordering power is at work, preventing the cosmos from slipping back into chaos and nothingness.
And in the Bible, humanity has a key role to play in this ordering work.
But to partner with God in that ongoing ordering of the cosmos, we need to be mentored by Lady Wisdom.
Lady Wisdom? Who's that?
Let's find out in Proverbs chapter 8.
Right. Oh dear. That's not good with it.
So within the Hebrew Bible, there's a scroll called Proverbs. It's about gaining wisdom.
And while most of the scroll is a collection of short proverbs, it begins with 9 chapters of speeches in which we meet a cast of symbolic characters.
There's a wise fatherly king and a woman named Lady Wisdom.
And they're offering divine wisdom that leads to stability and life.
There's also a wicked man and a wily woman called Lady Folly.
And their way of life is attractive, but it leads to disorder and death.
Okay, so these speeches force you to make a choice. Whose advice will you listen to?
Right, these contrasting couples are like poetic symbols of the many voices out there telling us how to be human. And in Proverbs, they're all competing for the attention of you, the reader, who's referred to throughout as my son.
Got it.
Now, all these speeches can be grouped into 3 main sections. And for now, we're going to focus on Proverbs chapter 8. It's a long speech from this majestic woman,
Lady Wisdom.
She's God's wisdom personified. And she stands at a crossroads on a tall hill, inviting you to enter into God's sacred city.
Doesn't wisdom cry out and understanding raise her voice? At the road's high point, at the crossroads, she stands. Besides the gates going into the city, at the entrance, she shouts.
And then Lady Wisdom begins her speech. It has 4 main parts. In the first part, Wisdom declares her value.
Choose my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than pure gold. For wisdom is more precious than pearls, and nothing you desire compares with her.
So living by God's wisdom can lead to the most valuable things in life. Healthy relationships, moral integrity, a stable, fruitful life.
You can't buy those things with money.
Right. And in the third part of her speech, she repeats the same idea.
Wealth and honor are with me, enduring abundance and justice. My fruit is better than pure gold, and what I offer surpasses silver.
Now, let's back up to the second part of her speech, where we learn that God's wisdom is very practical. In fact, humans depend upon it every day, whether they know it or not.
Through me, kings reign, and rulers issue decrees that are just. Through me, princes rule, and nobles, all who judge with justice.
Now, that phrase, issue decrees, comes from the Hebrew word chakak. It means literally to carve or engrave. It refers to how ancient kings would carve laws of justice onto tablets.
So a good leader confronts disorder and injustice by creating laws that are just. And when they do so, they're drawing on God's wisdom.
Right. Wise leaders become images of God, who also creates, by his decrees, carving order out of chaos. But God's decrees aren't written on tablets. Rather, they're woven into the fabric of creation itself. In fact, that's what the final part of Lady Wisdom's speech is all about. She claims that she was there with God in the beginning.
Yahweh brought me forth as the firstborn of his way, before his deeds of old. In the remote past, I was formed. From the beginning, from the earliest times of the land.
Now watch, she's going to repeat that Hebrew word, chakak, to describe how God carved order into the world.
When he established the skies, I was there. When he carved a horizon on the face of the deep waters.
Here God is splitting the dark, chaotic waters in half, making the waters above and below.
And he carved a boundary for the sea, so the waters don't cross his command.
This is God creating the boundary of the dry land, holding back the sea so humans can flourish in peace.
When he carved the foundations of the land, I was there.
The biblical authors imagined that the dry land was supported by pillars below to keep it from sinking back into the chaotic sea.
So this is the 3-tiered cosmos, described all over the Bible.
Right. It's how the Israelites and all their ancient neighbors imagined the world. And notice, the dry land is sustained and protected from the surrounding chaos only by God's wise carving abilities.
That's beautiful.
It is. And it's worth celebrating. Like Lady Wisdom says,
I was beside him growing up, and I was his daily delight, celebrating before him the entire time, celebrating the inhabited world of the land, delighting in human beings.
God's wisdom delights in the ordered universe, and also in humanity.
Yes, because humans are the image of God, called to live by divine wisdom as they carve out their own little spots here in his world.
But humans often reject God's wisdom, doing what's right in our own eyes.
And in the Bible, that's how humans drag creation back into chaos and darkness. It's only when we live by God's wisdom that we join his project of ordering the world, creating space and communities where all of God's creatures can flourish in peace. Or, as Lady Wisdom puts it at the conclusion of her speech,
"The one who finds me finds life and receives favor from Yahweh. But the one who forfeits me hurts themselves. Those who hate me love death."
So, every day, Lady Wisdom presents us with a choice. Will I live by God's wisdom and contribute order, beauty, and justice to the world?
Or am I going to live selfishly, by my own wisdom, and pull creation back into chaos from which it came?
That's the decision that lay before humans throughout the story of the Bible, and still today. Which way will you choose? Lady Wisdom is waiting for our answer.
So we have another question for you here to think about after this video. And there's also a quote from, in your notes I've sent out, if you've looked at it, from Elizabeth A. Johnson. I'll read this first. She says, wisdom is a beneficent, right, or not that one, John, is a beneficent, right ordering power in whom God delights and by whom God creates. Her constant effort is to lure human beings into life. Wisdom is the creative power of God that is embedded in the world, each created thing and the creation as a whole. Speaks of the wisdom of God at its foundation. So our two questions that we have here, I've got one up there, but you might want to think about the second as well. So how does wisdom help us understand our relationship to creation? And I'm asking, how does it help the church be more concerned with raising our voices in the public arena on some of these issues? So how does wisdom help you understand our relationship to creation, and what's the church's role in this? So I'm going to pop you back into breakout rooms to have a chat about those things. Okay, any comments that you want to share about this question? How does wisdom help us understand our relationship with creation? How might the church be involved in this?
I suggested that that on the day of the tree, that we had someone who preached about the trees and how they form communities. And I suggested that perhaps the next time we had a day of the tree, which presumably is in 12 months' time, that the congregation should go out and plant trees instead of working in a building.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, the one place wisdom isn't is in a building. Indeed. Any other comments people want to share?
Well, Matt, he's got himself muted, but perhaps you, Matt, do you want to unmute yourself and share that comment about the preeminence of wisdom over human beings?
Yeah, we had a really interesting discussion, and we spoke about individual wisdom and collective wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
But I also was just, I love reading this because this is so different to the Christianity I was taught growing up. And it just is fascinating to me that there's this being who kind of preceded humanity, who's before humanity, who was there at the beginning of the Lord's work. And I find that absolutely fascinating. It kind of puts us in our place. And I just really appreciate the kind of concept of all of creation. And I know, having read a little bit of Elizabeth Johnson, that's one of her big themes. We need to think about all of creation, not just humanity. Yeah.
Yes. When we come to Job, we'll be exploring that more, because the whirlwind God of Job makes that abundantly clear to Job. Do not think you are the center of the universe. You're not.
picking up on Matt's comment, the kind of Christianity that he grew up with, I suspect it was very similar to the one that I grew up with, which was in a Methodist church in Melbourne more decades ago than I like to think. But a discussion like this at that time would have been inconceivable.
Yeah.
We just didn't do Bible studies like that. We came to church on Sunday. We were in various church activities, youth groups and things during the week, but we didn't ever really probe the faith as we're doing now.
Yes, it was unusual. I think that's right, Ian. And also ministers don't always share what they're taught in theological college. You know, some get worried if they start talking about some of this stuff and doing this kind of exegesis, they'll upset their congregations. Now, I've never found that to be the case, and I have ministered in some very conservative congregations. I've always found people have a desire for knowledge, and where some things may surprise them and they have to get used to the idea, I've never found anyone get really upset in my time as a minister in my congregations about learning. So yeah, we probably should move on because there's another quote I want you to think about, and this is by prominent biblical scholar Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, and she's done quite a bit of writing about wisdom. And the quote is, I'll put it up: "Divine wisdom is a cosmic figure delighting in the dance of creation, a master craftswoman and a teacher of justice. She is a leader of her people and accompanies them on their way through history. Very unladylike, she raises her voice in public places, calls everyone who would hear her. She transgresses boundaries, celebrates life, and nourishes those who will become her friends. Her cosmic house is without walls, and her table is set for all." I think that is a wonderful statement about wisdom. And it also sums up chapter 9 too, which we're about to look at with the table of abundance. And I had a question. I'll ask you to think about it. We won't talk about it now, but think about how Fiorenza's words might relate to wisdom and how they're important to a community of faith. If we're expressing our faith, what is it wisdom can teach us about transgressing boundaries, celebrating life, nourishing those who come to us, being hospitable, being someone who is prepared to accompany people on their journeys? What is it if our house, our churches were without walls and our tables were set for all? So I'll leave you to think about that as a bit of homework. What would it look like if that's what the church was like? Is divine wisdom, this cosmic figure, a model that we can think about for basing what we do on? We're going to move now to the last part of Proverbs, which is the last part of wisdom in Proverbs, which is chapter 9. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. And you might note that corresponds with the 7 pillars they were talking about in the video in Genesis. She has slaughtered her animals. She has mixed her wine. She has set her table. She sends out her servant girls. She calls from the highest places in the town. You that are simple, turn in here. To those without sense, she says, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Lay aside immaturity and live, and walk in the way of insight. So the personification of wisdom in this passage, we see her with a temple-like house, that she's preparing a great feast. She's got, she's cooking animals, you know, so there's going to be sheep and goat and maybe beef, etc. there. So it's an abundance. She's got wine there. Like the story of the banquet in the New Testament, she sends out her servants. Note they're female, that's unusual. She sends out her servant girls. She calls from the highest places, and she's calling everyone to come and turn in and join her at her table, eat her bread. Bread is not bread as in, you know, a slice of bread. Bread there is really a word in Hebrew that means meat and victuals. Victuals might be a better way of translating it. So it's food. and drink of the wine I have mixed. Lay aside your immaturity and live. So this is the invitation she's giving. Walk in the way of insight. In the next few verses, which I haven't got up, she is contrasted with the foolish woman, or Madam Folly. And there's a difference between the two. Wisdom builds her own house, prepares her own meal, and I would note again to you, they're very masculine characteristics that she's showing here. And then she is sending out people to invite people in, and she's calling to invite people in. The foolish woman merely sits at the door of her house. She calls out to anyone who happens to pass by. That's in verses 14 and 15. Her meals get stolen. No one sticks around. They just take the goodies and run. And while wisdom's meal leads to life, foolishness ends up killing her guests by their own stupidity. So we've got this direct contrast of the two here. I was quite interested in this contrast because I was thinking that in some ways it reminded me of the church. On the one hand, we have wisdom, who's out there in the public arena. She's actually mixing with people. She's sending her folk out into the community to gather them. She's offering all this hospitality. She's offering these gifts of herself. And then we have, on the other hand, the one that just sits there and expects people to come through the door. And I have to say, it did remind me a bit of the church, because often we think if we just open our doors, people are going to walk through. And the reality is nowadays that is getting less and less common. So I'm going to ask you for the last time to talk in your groups and think about in what ways might this passage be suggesting about wisdom in a faithful life? What might it be suggesting? And in what ways do these two women reflect the church today? So they're your questions. What is it saying about wisdom in a faithful life, especially a communal faithful life? And in what ways do the two women reflect the church today? Welcome back. We're pretty much at the end of our session, but does anyone quickly want to share something from their groups?
In our group, we had a discussion about going to other churches and being made to feel welcome. And some churches make you feel welcome, some don't. Sadly, some uniting churches I've been in don't make me feel welcome. And if as a member of the uniting church, I don't feel like going back there, what about Joe and Jenny Blow, ordinary members of the community who are trying out that church for the first time? They're not going to go back either.
No, that's right. That's quite right. If we're not welcoming, then people aren't going to stick around. Anything else people want to share?
It's just that we have something to offer that is substantial and not like the stolen water, which is cheap and worth nothing.
Yes.
So, but we've got the wine that's been mixed, so there's some preparation and something real to offer to people.
Like we need a good coffee machine.
Good coffee is always a bonus because people will stick around if your coffee is all right. It's true.
No, it's right. It's a very good hospitality tool.
It is a good hospitality tool.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, not at the moment.
No, not at the moment. No, we miss out.
Nothing is working like that at the moment because we can't meet.
But once upon a time, a lot of church. Now, I mean, it's not a silly thing to say because I have been in congregations where the attitude is, well, what's wrong with the cheap instant coffee that we can get because it doesn't cost us much and we'll get the cheap biscuits. And I got howled down when I said, but you wouldn't even have that at home yourself. Why would you offer that to visitors coming into your church? I thought I was too new out of college to be worth listening to.
Yes, and they probably had International Roast, which is the only worse coffee than that is Pablo's. Anyway. So we should conclude now from our study, and we've had a lot of discussion in this study.
We've got a conclusion slide.
We have a conclusion slide. There's Lady Wisdom in her tent again. So Wisdom is offering us a radical and subversive model and a disturbing presence. She is not confined to a building. She's out there in the public space meeting people where they are. She offers a spirituality that is about a journey. It's about being on a road. It's a spirituality of public places, open borders, of nourishment, hospitality, celebration, and equality, rather than a spirituality of categories, doctrines, systems, and boxes that have come to categorize the Christian church. Instead of an enclosed gathering, she offers a space where social and spiritual change can take place. And I want to leave you with some questions to actually think about, and they're in the guide that I sent, John sent you out yesterday. What does choosing the way of the rather unladylike wisdom, this radical prophet who leaves her house for the street corner, crying out to all who pass by to come and join her, look like for the church? What would we be doing if we were doing wisdom stuff? Would we be raising our voices in the public arena? Can we stand out in the marketplace and exhibit a deep and profound relationship with God as we engage with people in the town square? So there's some questions there for you to think about. Are we going to sit there and just hope people walk through the door as we remain in our familiar self-contained comfort zone? Or are we going to go out and engage in the marketplace? So they're the questions that we want to leave you about from this study of Lady Wisdom, where next week we'll be looking at the book of Ecclesiastes, the teacher. But just before we end, has anyone got some burning questions that they wish to ask? Pretty much everything John and I have said are in the notes you've been sent out if you want to go over anything. And the URL for the video is also in the notes. If you want to watch that again, you can do that.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed learning about and discussing Lady Wisdom. I'm rather fond of her. Being a loud, subversive female myself, I find her very attractive.
So there's some 31 chapters in Proverbs, and we've just jumped into some of them, and we're coming back to Proverbs 31 later on. But Proverbs gets a go in the lectionary a few times at the moment, which is good. Next week in Ecclesiastes, there's 12 chapters, and I'm preparing Ecclesiastes at the moment. My aim is that we will have noticed something about each of the 12 chapters, so I encourage you to read it. Just read it through. Don't have to think about it too much, although it may cause you to start thinking as you read it.
That's right. Wisdom has that impact on people.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for your attendance. We'll have Lectionary Cafe at 12 today. If you wish to stay and join us for Lectionary Cafe, we just talk about the 4 lectionary readings, no preparation needed. We just have a good gab fest about what we think they might mean. And that will start at 12. So if you're not staying for that, I'd ask you to please take yourself out of the room, but you are welcome if you wish to join the people who are part of Lectionary Cafe at 12. So thank you for coming this morning, and we'll see the rest of you next week.